Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club, the Kids Edition, for the month of, what is this? This is July.
Yeah.
This is our July book. Hello, and we've got a really good one this month. It's Puppy Night, Den of Deception, and we are joined right here live in the store by Jose CRUZ, and there's our author, Michael Sweater from Arkansas. Hello, Michael, how are you? Oh, wait, he's still muted. Ha ha. Still muted. There we go. There we go. How you doing, buddy?
I said good. Howdy, I guess.
Yeah. Awesome. Great to see both of you. Thank you for coming and talking. Thank you for making a fun book like this.
Yeah.
Let me start off with the place that I always start off. I always have the first question as my first question. And that's why comics. Of all the different things you could be doing, of all the ways you could be expressing yourself, what is it about comics that speaks to you, that inflames you, that makes you passionate? Why don't you start, Jose? I'll sway.
Yeah. We rehearsed this so we talked.
Yes, we did. Yeah, I know.
Basically, one thing I struggled with, like even like into adulthood, was like trying to like express myself with art, and I never really felt like the art that I was drawing, even as a kid. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to send a message. Like I wasn't like trying to create an abstract piece and have people try to interpret it. All the stuff that I drew as a little kid, I drew short comics, I drew ideas for video games, I drew all the little enemies, instructions on how they would move. I wanted it to be utilized. Like it had to have a utilitarian purpose. And so comics kind of felt like that natural thing. Like somebody's going to hold this thing, read it, and like, take a story out of it.
Yeah.
And it felt like such like a useful thing. And like I studied graphic design. That's what I went to school for. And that's because like for me, like that was also like a something you utilize. Like, you see signage, you see a package or something, like it's something you use all the time. And I wanted, graphic design is very objective, and it's just like you see what you get. And I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to tell fantasy stories, stuff that didn't really exist. Yeah. And so comics was just that medium to tell those stories.
Graphic design and comics are really, really different from one another.
Very different, but you see some people kind of mix it. Like, I'm blanking on his name. He wrote
Chris Ware?
Chris Ware.
I was about to say that too, but I wanted to see if you would get there on your own.
But like he essentially is a good example of how to mix it through things.
Sure. The other one who makes me think of is the Marvel writer. He's a writer nowadays, but he used to do his own art. He wrote Secret Wars. Jonathan Hickman.
I didn't know it was graphic design.
I don't know that he was a graphic designer, but his original. Right. If you look at the comics that he drew, right, they're all very, very, very design heavy. Right. They're all infographic looking. Right. Which makes me think that he's that his background is probably graphic.
There's another graphic designer, that cartoonist named Charles Schloss, who also does a lot of graphic design and cartoon.
Yeah. Interesting. Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question. Why comics, man?
Yeah. So I did not draw as a kid. In my early 20s, I became interested in storytelling. But I'm a very visual person, and it was the medium that was the most accessible. So I just went with it. Like, as somebody who can't really draw, you can't really learn to make cartoons. And I knew novels weren't going to be my thing. So I just started, and, I've just stuck with it because it's like, I don't think I'd be very good in like a highly collaborative corporate setting. So like animation doesn't really make sense for me. Movies, you need a lot of permission to make and a lot of help. Comics, you just need like paper and pencils. Like, so it's always just made sense to me as like the perfect medium for me. I actually don't have, I've developed a deep love for comics just by doing it because that's what's going to happen. But for me, it's just about the accessibility and the lack of like permission. Like anyone listening to this right now can decide to make a comic and do it, and nobody can tell you no. You just do it.
Yeah. What was the first comic that you remember reading that stuck with you?
As a kid, I didn't really read comics. I know I read Dilbert in the newspaper for some reason. Right. I was a very strange kid. And then in maybe middle school, I was into video games, and I found a comic called PvP on like a video game website, and it's just like a web comic.
Yeah.
And besides those two in Akewood, I had no comics reading experience as a child, really, which, kind of sad. I wish I did.
So your early experiences are pretty much strips, then,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, interesting. Because it's a very different thing than a comic book where you're telling a story over a broader thing. Let me ask you the same question, Josue. Damn it! What is wrong with
it? Gets funnier though.
Does it? Okay. Well, what's the first comic that you remember that stuck with you?
Yeah, I thought about this question a lot because getting into comics so much later in my life, like I felt like I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, what even inspired this? But like the very first, like my dad would bring back these one-a-day calendars from work, and they were all Far Side comics.
Yeah.
And so he'd bring those and give them to me, and I loved them. They were so funny. And I was probably like maybe 8 or 9, and like the kind of dry humor somehow stuck to me.
Yeah.
And like I wouldn't use up the calendars. I just keep them in my drawer, and those are my first comic books.
Right.
And then my dad would give me the Sunday newspaper, and then after that, I have 2 older brothers, and I think the oldest brother he started subscribing to Mad Magazine, and I didn't know I was reading comics. I was just like, this is just a magazine with like cartoons and a bunch of spoofs of movies I've never seen, and I don't get these jokes.
Right.
But I love like Sergio Aragonés, like wordless cartoons.
Yeah.
Like that was like my favorite thing ever, and I didn't know it was comics. And then like elementary school passes by, I'm drawing. I have friends who also draw little comics, but I wasn't reading anything. And then high school, my friends get into like DC and Marvel, and then me trying to be a contrarian, I'm like, I'm gonna read Hellboy. Right. I'm not going to choose between the two.
Yeah.
So I got into Mike Mignola, and then I got into my local library, and that's where I found CRUZ. That's where I found Daniel Klaus, Adrian Tomine, and that's kind of how I got into more like more adult stories and indie comics, and then now I'm kind of in this kind of new renaissance of like reading older stuff, like old like DuckTales and Donald Duck comics, Mickey Mouse comics, and then like finally getting into stuff like Mobius and like those Franco-Belgian comic book artists. Yeah. A lot of great Italian comic book artists, and basically just pulling like, I love this, I want to do this, and that's how I come about like with the art style. I'm like, I love how this looks here, I want to do that. And that's how anyway, that was my history of it.
No. I like that. I mean, I like hearing sort of the evolution of an artist and the evolution of a style and how you figure it out. I think that's terrific. Where did the idea for Puppy Night come from? Did this start the collaboration? Did it start with one of you?
I had drawn loose thumbnails. Like I have a kind of strange process where I write by just drawing the pages. Yeah. So I draw them very loosely. I think had I drawn most of the first book before we talked?
You sent me like kind of like the pitch deck. You sent me the pitch deck.
Okay, yeah. So I had drawn in my like loose way. There's some versions of it in the back of Puppy Night, but it's I just realized like I had written it and I was like, I'm not the right person to draw this. It needs like a little more pizzazz than I have. Also, I don't know that I would have had the time to do it. I like compulsively write new comics. So, I had to reach out. And then it evolved so much since Josue has looked at it. Like, there's huge elements of what the story is and the structure that's just based on, the visual element that was brought to it, sort of changing it. I think the third act is completely different than what we had originally had written in the larger book. And then, I wrote Den of Deception after we had already started talking about doing it, just so we had a shorter project. And, that was written to Josue's art in kind of a way. I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense.
Oh, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. When I'm working with somebody, it's very important that I think about how they would, thrive and what they want to do. And also like talking about it. Like, I think I ask a lot, what do you want to draw?
Yeah. Yeah, and Mike didn't approach it with dogs first. It was they were mice.
Hmm.
You had a concept for that.
Yeah, that I compulsively come up with and pitch and design stories. That's like what's interesting to me is stories. And the mice thing, if I felt like it was too serious and not as fun. So I think Puppy Night existed before the mice thing too, though.
I think I didn't know the full history of it. But when you first reached out about like let's work on a comic book together, we were gonna it was gonna be like the story of these mice, and then it kind of evolved. And not evolved, but I think we just pivoted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got like 5 or 6 undrawn, like written books just from the last couple of years. So I just shuffle stuff around and I'm like, oh, this thing from this. And, it's a pretty chaotic process, but, a lot of it is just, thinking about Josue's art and thinking about like, how would I want that to look? Like, how would they want to do that?
Yeah.
Very convoluted.
I'm curious about about you guys doing a kids comic.
Mhm.
You were talking about how your background in reading comics was kind of artsy alt stuff. Michael, most of your work is artsy alt kind of stuff. Where did just like let's do a straight up kids comic come from?
I don't know if it because I getting serious about comics that didn't happen until 2019, and so for me, mostly like a lot of my culture influence was video games and cartoons, and a lot of your fond memories about cartoons and video games were when you had all the time in the world to watch and play them as a kid. So I think I naturally gravitated towards that. Like a lot of the reason that I know how to draw is because of video game manuals and like loving the Mario characters, and so like I use very similar shapes in my drawing. So I think the shapes themselves are very kid friendly. So I think that's how I gravitated.
I'll just say I don't believe I've ever written a kid's comic. I just write what I want to write, and then in the editing stage, I'll remove things that may not be appropriate.
I see. Okay.
I've got another series called The Wizard with Oni, and the original version of it was very violent, and I just took the violence out. I didn't grow up really reading a lot of kids' media. When I was like a small child, I was reading like pulp sci-fi, like at like 10 years old. So I didn't really like cartoons as a kid or TV. I was very strange. So I don't really think of it as a kid's comic. And I don't think kids, if we look at like the comics that are made for kids in Japan, like they're adult comics. Like it's just, there's certain things you can't put in it. And I think making things specifically for kids is kind of, for me, I find it, if I was to do it, I would feel like I was being condescending, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, and I mean, I think that when we look at the most popular comics, particularly if you think like Reina, those are all autobiographical comics. They're not. They just happen to be done in a cartoony style. The content is actually quite adult. I think it's one of the reasons the kids like it so much because kids, as you noted, Michael, don't like being talked down to, and they can smell it right away if they're being condescended to. And they like reading up. They like getting a greater experience. I was just sort of wondering if there had been any thought, whether it was from you or whether it was from Avi and Silver Sprocket, that like the kids market is hot right now. Let's try and do something in that space.
I'm sure that's why we were able to arrange. I'm sure that has something to do with why we got a yes. But it's not part of my thought process at all.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of why we got a yes.
What's the process of pitching like with a book like this?
I think it's different for everybody. I'm a very lax pitcher. I'm very conversational, and I like to have relationships with people. So a lot of stuff like this is me calling people or emailing people who I know and being like, hey, I've got an idea for something and it's kind of loose, but can like we talk about it? And you know, I feel like by the end of the conversation, a lot of the times if I have a pitch deck, it's for their boss. If something like that exists. Yeah, like I don't know that like we had an internal pitch deck for this, but I don't know how helpful that was in getting the book made. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to. I have everything in my life is a very chaotic process. I just wake up and do what feels correct in the moment, for better or worse.
Right.
So, yeah.
So you said you had originally started drawing it yourself. At what point did you get involved?
Yeah, because you did have like I don't know. Did you have the first act of the wider, bigger book before we started doing Den of Deception?
I had at least 140 pages of it done.
Okay.
Essentially
the first half.
What?
Like,
yeah, it was at least half done. It could have been more. Like, I really don't. I just wake up and work, and I don't really remember what I've done. So it's kind of hard for me to recall. But yeah, it was pretty far along, but it's now a completely different thing than it would have been if I had done it myself.
Yeah. So Mike kind of mentioned earlier, like Dead Deception was a new story that was written for Silver Sprocket. You know, it was my first time doing a big comic. The largest amount of pages I ever did for a comic was 5 pages.
Right.
And so, you know, Avi was like the reality check, like, hey, like, you know, this is kind of, you know, biting more than we can chew. Let's start with a smaller story because, like, you know, Mike had 100 pages and that was going to be half. So there's going to probably be a 200-page book. Mm-hmm. And so Mike came up with this brand new story. It just worked very well for kind of an introduction to these heroes. And then now we're working on that larger 200-page story.
Yeah.
But when we first started working together, I created 2 sample spreads from that original story. And so that was my introduction. That's where I came in, was to create example art of my style for that pitch deck.
Yeah. So, but your original initial thought was that you were going to be doing the bigger, longer story.
Yes, and like, you know, kind of how Mike prefaced the interview, basically saying, like, you know, comics are so accessible, and like if you have an idea for a story, you should do it. I told Mike, like, do you really think I can do this? Like, if you think you can, yeah. And I was like, I didn't know how much work a 200-page. I know now how much work a 200-page takes. But like, I was like, sure. Like, this guy believes in me. Why not? Mm-hmm. And you know, I think, you know, there is kind of you need a sounding board. You need to be like, okay, there's the freedom of creating art, and then there's the reality of like deadlines and sure. like, you know, whatever they need to like actually sell and market this book. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like that's the reality check, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of it was a good learning experience to kind of learn to balance that right off the bat.
Yeah. How did the two of you get together? I guess is where I'm not figuring out the story.
Yeah, I followed Mike's work on Tumblr.
Okay.
Like back in 2011, I think. His wife Benji also had a Tumblr, and like I really liked their comics. And actually, I have it makes Mike cringe, but I have some of his oldest books in my library, and I brought some to.
I will flip out.
But so like, you know, I was reading his old zines and old comics, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is really fun.
Oh no.
We're back. Here we are. Okay. There we are.
But essentially, Tumblr kind of crashed, and so like, and I was focusing on school, so I wasn't really on social media as much. And then around 2017, I started my Instagram, and I was trying to follow artists that I really like. And I came across Mike and Benji again, and I followed them. I reached out, hey, I don't know if you remember me, and to my surprise, like, he didn't remember me. Yeah. And then 2 years after that, because 2017, 18, 19, I got laid off from my design job, and I moved back home. My mom convinced me, like, just don't move too fast. Like, just try to like rethink what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I took that time to like, I want to try to take comics more seriously. And so I spent that time reaching out to more people and then putting out short comics, just a bunch of like short little Instagram swiping comics, and participating in zines, a local zine called Laser Zine by that Alex Sadari puts together in Oakland. That was like my first 5-pager comic.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mike reached out. Like, that's the whole story of like, you think you can do this, you want to do this.
Yeah. So like literally from the strength of a 5-page comic that you had seen, Michael, is that you pick up the narrative from here?
So I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how much I had seen, but I know that I really like Josue. And to me, that's the most important thing with working with someone.
Sure.
And they hadn't done a lot of comics, but the way we work, I kind of draw the pages loosely.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the learning curve, if they were going to have a problem, is kind of not there. The like, how big do I make this image?
Right.
What order do I put this in?
Right.
And they, Josue totally changes my layouts now. Like they take a drawing and they're like, this, not so good. We're going to do it like this. And it's better. But, even worst case scenario where they just had to basically draw over my drawing, it would have been fine.
Yeah.
And, I know that, they've had actual professional work experience in other industries. Those skills all cross over. The big thing with comics is, can you do it consistently every day for a long time?
Sure.
And if you can do that, you can have a career, as far as, my opinion is. Everything else is learnable. I don't know that that's learnable. I struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you have to have craft in there somewhere. I
think it can be learned, though.
I guess. I mean, I know plenty of people who are trying to do comics who can't get it done,
Maybe.
And they're making comics every day, but but it's just not good enough to get published,
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know.
I think there's this kind of weird like mesh that happened when we started working together. Like, my art style was a certain way, and it's also in the back of the book, kind of how the evolution of the art style went from Mike's original drawings to my own. And the original was like, okay, how can I kind of mirror Mike's art style?
Mm-hmm.
And then his sensibilities mixed with my sensibilities, and that's what created that. And actually, that's kind of what's helped create my own style right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, okay, I like these kind of cartoony characters with these like very simple eyes and very cute expressions.
Mm-hmm.
And it all kind of came from like a lot of like I was reading The Wizard that Mike and Rachel Dukes drew, and I was like, okay, like I want to get some more vibes from this, and how do I absorb some of this into my own life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of an interesting symbiosis that happened while working with Mike.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then sorry, going back to the rough, because he roughs out all the pages, and then I do my own roughs, adjusting like if I want to change the layout here, but I'm still following like his layouts.
Right.
And it was kind of like working on this book. It was like training wheels. Like I was like, okay, cool. Like I'm doing this real big thing now. That was the biggest thing I've ever done at the time. And I was so thankful that I had the ability to have those training wheels with Mike's roughs to work.
Yeah. So you do roughs for you do any traditional quote unquote writing at all, Michael, or is it all you're just doing comic?
I have a page file on my computer that has like 200 blank comic pages. And then I just start drawing into the pages, and I jump around and move, and then I can kind of, if something isn't right, I can collage it and edit it. But to me, so much of comics writing is the action, and it makes so much more sense for me to just draw it than to describe this person is feeling despair and is holding a block of cheese.
Yeah.
There's so much in that can be intended in my drawing, like in the angle of how they're holding it, and just like what I mean by a look of despair that isn't translatable. And also just like seeing it visually on the page, a lot of the times what's already on the page visually writes what happens next.
Sure.
So it never made sense to me to script traditionally. And I mean, it works for a lot of people, but for me, it it seems like extra effort.
The most annoying thing for this first book was getting his literally a huge Photoshop document with all the pages, and it's this heavy thing that like my computer had to struggle opening up. Now I get PDF pages. Now I get individual PDF pages to work off of. But yeah, like he just has this whole document, and like it's so great kind of peering into his brain, because like he'll draw out his panels in this document, but then you'll see like the side sketch that has nothing to do with like the book on this on like the columns of like drops. And I'm just like, what was like thinking here? And it was just kind of, it's a really pretty thing to see when you're inside somebody's brain like that.
Yeah.
Well, also with the big file, I have a really bad habit of not knowing what I've done. And on the Wizard, I redrew at least 30 pages multiple times because I forgot I drew them. And with the big Photoshop file, I don't forget I've written a scene, because my brain, when I go to sleep, everything is no longer there. So I'll accidentally like rewrite stuff, or I'll write, a scene and forget I did it because it's in a notebook, and I'll find it after the book's out, and I'd be like, that would have been really great to be in there. Great job, Michael. So this way, with the big file, I just don't lose anything, and everything's in order, and I know what I've done, and I can also visually see what's done, because like I'm a very visual person.
No, it's an interesting way of working. I don't know. I think you guys both know that we've done 8 years of these interviews between two clubs, so we're at more than 200 interviews with people. And I don't know that I've heard of a duo working in precisely this way yet. It's kind of one of the things I love about comics is there's not a way to do it.
No.
Every method works. It's really interesting, because when I look at this page,
that has Mike's roughs and then my own roughs.
Because I think Michael's stuff is perfectly serviceable.
That's what I have to say. Perfectly serviceable art. I'm just joking.
You knew what I meant, man.
No, I know. But also the way that looks when I work for myself, I literally print that out in blue line and just draw over it. If it doesn't need to be edited. So it's like a lot faster to work this way for me as well.
Sure. So Josue, when you get a page like this, like what is your, because obviously it isn't this page and then that's your version of that page, right?
Right. So sorry, that's not the direct comparison.
Yeah. So how much redrawing? I mean, obviously you're redrawing the entire thing, but how much reconceptualizing, I suppose, is the word that I want there.
And that's a good word. That's a good way to put it, because like I think one of the phases of my process is like the intake of like what Mike gives me, and then it's kind of like the adjustment of the lens, and essentially like Mike has this kind of like video game kind of style where like if you read like Everything Sucks, like it's this isometric kind of style, and it kind of looks like video game characters walking around in a world. And then I was reading, like specifically for that book, I was reading Asterix. I was reading
Tintin?
no, I wasn't reading Tintin. I was reading Karl Barth's Scrooge and Popeye. But Popeye not so much. I think Popeye I wanted to see how the action and the action lines work. Yeah. So I wanted environments that like really brought you into the world, and the way I learned how to draw has to be through experience, and this book taught me how to draw in perspective. Essentially, I don't think I was this drawing perspective, and there's some wonky stuff in there, but you get better with practice.
Sure, of course.
But
like anything,
exactly. So like I think that allowed me to create like all these environments with very different camera angles sometimes, and so like what I'll do when I reconfigure Mike's layouts is like, okay, how can we get the same kind of oomph of this shot, but how can we get like a similar vibe of this rough with a more oomph of a different kind of angle or shot, or maybe an extreme angle. And so now I'll play around with like in our next book, I'm playing around with even more extreme perspective angles, and that kind of brings more dynamism to the page.
Yeah. Did you want to say something there, Michael? Because I thought you made a sound for a second.
I might have just been making a sound.
Okay, all good. Just wanted to make sure. So I guess my next question would be is as you get more experience and as you're building up your own muscles here, right? Because it is essentially building muscles, right? Do you find having these kinds of layouts to continue to be as helpful, or does it start to become, wow, I'm really changing a lot of this, if you see what I mean?
Yeah. I'm not changing the layouts. I am changing the way the art fits, and like I think that's a great way to put it, like the building of the muscles and more adjustment. And I think that's kind of the symbiosis.
You actually do change layouts now.
Not the panel.
Yeah, there's a couple where you have, and I'm into it.
Yeah, like, sometimes they'll be like, okay, I think like there might be a beat that we can want here, and then like I'll check in with Mike. It's still a collaborative process. We don't want to step on each other's toes, but like in my comic making journey, I think I still need more practice with like creating my own layouts, and so I haven't achieved that yet. And so like I am working on like a short with my friend Gang Fight. Like he writes a super sport baseball comic called Strikeout. It's on Twitter. Check it out. And like I'm doing my own layouts for that. So sometimes you have to jump into the pool and like throw yourself into learning experiences. And so I think that's the next step of my journey. Is like, okay, let's take the training wheels off. Let's see how I can play around with panel layout.
How much thought is going into the individual? Because so to me, the language of comics is not the individual panels, but it's the space between the panels. It's the gutters, right? And so, what the juxtaposition of one image and another is almost to me the most important part of comics. How much thought do you put into that, Michael, in your thumbnails versus it just being an instinctive gut level thing? I don't know if that was a good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours thinking about structure and form and all of these things. And then I'll say when I'm working, when I'm actually drawing the page, I don't think at all. Everything's completely intuitive, no matter what art I'm doing. If I'm thinking, I feel like it's not as good. But the time spent, going to bed, reading, books from the library on like form, that's where that thinking happens. I find if I think about it too much when I'm actually working, it becomes sort of like it looks like I'm trying to highlight the structure, which reads interestingly, but is not the kind of storytelling I want to do. So yeah, I don't think at all when I'm working. I just literally start filling in boxes and moving stuff around. And, I find if I'm thinking about the structure of what's happening, it's time for me to go for a walk.
Yeah. Well, let me pull on that thread just a little bit because you say you're filling in the panels and then you move things around. At the point you're moving things around, though, obviously there must be some level of thought into, oh, this isn't working in this manner. If we do it this way, it'll work better. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I work, I think of every page as a discrete idea, like it's its own comic strip. And it has a similar setup to a comic strip where I'm inciting the conflict. It ends on how it resolves. And then usually I write those two things first, and then I fill in the center. And if there isn't enough room, I'll then turn that into 2 pages that do the same function. But yeah, I'm just moving stuff around to make room for the next thing that comes into my head. I'm like, okay, well then in between these things and then I just bump stuff. I move stuff around a lot less than anyone might assume. I do not edit very much, but my writing process is like highly improvisational, and it feels very natural to me. So it's usually just looking at. Also, like a lot of the times I'll know I want to end on like a large image of like something, and I know that the starting image looks like this, and then the amount of space left on the page is how I write what's in between. I write to fit the space a lot of the time. Try not to make any metaphors about music, but it's very similar to that sort of like improvisation where, you work with the space that's created by what's already there sometimes.
Sure.
I hate making metaphors. I feel like it makes me sound so stupid.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
I always find these kinds of things about technique to be fascinating because it's it's sort of a magic. Now you were saying that that you're designing each page as a unit, as a page, which makes a tremendous amount of sense to me. How much though are you thinking about what would be the page turn at that point?
All the time. If there's so we specifically, I work in spreads. So if the pages have to be where they are on my thing because things like page turns where you turn the page and it reveals something. I also I don't like scenes changing in the middle of a spread. So if you have the left hand page is someplace, I always want the right hand page to be in the same location, just because like a unity of like color and design. So yeah, I'm thinking about it, but it's mostly I'm developing opinions on that stuff while I'm not working.
Sure.
The page flip could interrupt the gag.
Yeah.
I think kind of what Mike was saying earlier, and you took the words out of my mouth, like the way, like it probably comes out very naturally to you, but like what I've been learning a lot from seeing Mike's layouts is just kind of like you could take chunks of the spreads and it's like there's your newspaper strip. Like the gags follow that proper order, and yeah, you don't want to flip the page in the middle of the joke.
Also, the reveal can often be the incitement of a new conflict. So you turn it and it's like, oh, there's a monster. Well, that's its own separate idea. So it's not really the end necessarily. So it feels structurally fine. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it makes a perfect amount of sense. Obviously, you're learning from what Michael's doing. Have you, when you look to the stuff you were doing before you were working with him, to the stuff that you're doing now, do you feel like you've learned some of those lessons, or like how would you approach building a page if you had a blank page?
Sure.
Right. If he just gave you words on a script, how would you approach it? Would you approach it in a similar way?
I think one of the things I adopted from Mike was that whole action first kind of thing. And like Mike and Benji had a podcast where they talked about like how much dialogue and text you plan ahead of time, and like I'm not sure how controversial it is, but like he doesn't really like he said it, like Mike said earlier, he draws it all out. And so I've been trying that, and like I've been trying that with like very short like social media posts because it's low stakes and just like okay, let's put something together, and you just drawing the art and then like filling out the story kind of has a very natural approach to it. Because sometimes when you're banging your head on a blank piece of paper trying to plan out a comic, you're spending way too much time agonizing. And sometimes just drawing the first thing, even if it's something stupid that you're going to change later, is probably the best way to kick off that challenging blank. And so what I learned is that like by drawing that way, drawing action first, you started it defines the panels on its own, because like, okay, I just do this action. Now, if I want this follow through, how much space am I going to need to actually have this make sense? Yeah. And so I used to, my original approach used to be like, okay, box it out first, or not really box it out. Like I have the dialogue, let's box out the dialogue to see like where the how the conversation is going to go. And what happens sometimes is either I might overestimate how much space I need and make a page more cluttered than it needs to be. And so it's not natural. And so I think drawing the action out has been one of the biggest like tips I've picked up from like Mike's comic.
Yeah. No, that's really good. Did you and Benji come to a conclusion of what the proper balance of word to picture is?
I don't remember the conversation.
It was about it's called Penthouse Podcast and Spotify. But it was about like, how do you write out your script first?
Right.
Not so much about what the balance is. It's like how much of the script do you write before you draw the comic. And I think like the approach that we're suggesting was like, you kind of draw first and then have the dialogue come out of what the story is. Yeah.
It really depends on what kind of comic you make. Like my favorite comic, Achewood, you could never make that comic the way I make comics. Like you have to script that. If you're doing something like Doonesbury, like my method is nonsense. Like that should be scripted. Even stuff like Watchmen, like my method would have been a terrible way to make that book.
Well, I mean, especially Watchmen. Because Watchmen is constructed like a timepiece. I mean, it's things interlocking. Yeah. I reread Watchmen pretty much every year, and every year I see something new.
Yeah.
Some little detail in the background that like, wow, I cannot believe they threw that little thing in that doesn't change the story, but it changes the world. It makes the world feel real, Yeah.
It's the I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do anything, but I do think if you're just making stuff that's, and I may change the way I work later, but for now, I don't think I'm good enough to labor over anything. It seems like I need to get more practice. And this is, to me, the fastest way of generating new structures and things to sort of iterate and figure out what I don't even know what I like yet, So spending a lot of time, to me, the text sort of, the TypeScript sort of mentally promotes a lot of editing. And I don't know how to edit because I don't think I'm good enough to even do that. So this is just, for me, this is the best way to work.
Interesting. Let me just say for anybody out there, if you have a question for these guys or a question about the book, you can feel free to ask it. Put it in the chat here, and we will try and get to it. I will go back to asking questions now myself, but I always forget to mention that, and then it's a little different. Editing process. Okay, so you're saying that you literally are just making comics and you're just drawing it and there's really no editing involved. It is when you hand it over to the publisher, I'm assuming the Silver Sprocket is whatever you give us is what it is, right? Like they're not asking for changes, they're not, or am I wrong about that?
I think Silver Sprocket is good in that they ask the artist what they want. Like if you want an editor at Silver Sprocket, I'm pretty sure that that's a thing. We did it. We had somebody look at this short. I don't really remember. Did that happen?
I think we had Karina and Ari look at it.
Yeah.
I think that was mostly from like copy editing or review kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think we had generally like full reign of the story. The only thing is like, if we wanted to make an all ages comic book, you have to be like, we have a tavern scene at the very start of the book, and like, you have to make sure that stuff like looks like soda. It's soda. It's purple. I tried other colors like, red looks like too much like wine. Brown looks like beer. Like it's soda. It's purple. And then like there's even cast that says like puppy tail cola.
Right.
Which is actually a bilingual joke because cola is tail in Spanish, so puppy tail.
Yeah.
And so also we used like the 1980 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle rules where like any sword or like sharp object is used for bonking. Nobody actually really gets cut by anything sharp in these stories.
Sure.
And so like, there's some things that we self like moderated on in regards to like what kind of content we're putting in the book.
Yeah. I just, I was wondering it more in terms of, he's handed you 140 pages of the original thing. Was it edited at any point, or that?
The big one we're working with an editor on.
Okay.
And they're actually, it's been a more positive experience than I expected. But I'm more open to editing now, and especially with projects like this. Like, when I say like I don't edit, it's because the people who read my comics generally are there for something very specific, and it's not necessarily like my tight storytelling. And
what would you say it is?
My point of view.
Okay.
I think that's what most people come to any artist for, is just a point of view. I think that's like, we all love comics that are technically lacking. My favorite comic is Achewood, and you couldn't make the argument that that's drawn well or is designed well.
Right.
And it's the best comic in my opinion. And it's because of the point of view. And I think that's, but as you work with bigger things that are being printed in larger quantities. Can you hear my dog? Okay, cool. My dog's making noise downstairs. As you do things with larger quantities, I feel like the publisher gets the ability to ask you to, hey, can you take a look at this and think about this?
Sure.
And, with the edits, we don't necessarily always do everything or take the suggestion, but it's, if I think if anyone's printing a book and they want to give you some input, they're taking a risk. So you have to at least check it out.
Yeah. No, and I also, it's always been my feeling that anybody who edits comics is their whole goal is to make the comic better.
Yeah.
They're not trying to change what you're doing. They're trying to get you to be more precise about the thing that you want, Oh, if you do it this way, you'll actually communicate the idea better and more clearly.
It's been more constructive than anything else.
Yeah. It also really depends on the editor. Like the editor we're working with, I don't know if I can say anything. They're like, I've really enjoyed working with them. But I've also done things with editors where I thought most of the things they asked of me were arbitrary. Whereas like this editor, it's like, oh yeah, no, this actually is unclear and I need to clear this up. It's not just you duplicated this word twice on this page and that's the only note for 100 pages. Yeah. I'm trying to be very nice.
Yeah, no, for sure. Based upon what you said in terms of having a file, I'm assuming that you're working digitally. Is that?
I work both ways. I'll like here. Let me see if I can. We're doing revisions on a book, and so there are pages. And I'll just take the picture on my cell phone and drop it into the file, or I'll work in the file digitally. But I do maintain everything in that one file. But yeah, my approach to how I actually put anything onto a piece of paper changes based on how I feel when I wake up.
I see. Okay. And you're working on lined paper there. Is that to help you visualize the page, or? It
was a cheap notebook that was like 10 for $30.
Okay, I'm saying,
No, I prefer online paper.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just use I burn through material so quickly, and I'm like not precious about it.
Yeah.
So I just use whatever's cheapest. These notebooks are actually very durable. The pen bleeds through 3 sheets at a time. But yeah, I just do what feels good. Because also, if you're not enjoying the physical process of interacting with the thing, you're going to be slower and you're not going to write as well, I think.
Sure.
Yes. I work full digitally on all the art. And so there's burnout when you're staring at a screen all day. And so I think there is a difference with if you're working I think you just have to step away, and that's how usually I get out of funks or art block. It's usually because I'm looking at a screen all day.
Yeah.
And so I growing up as a kid, I drew on just pencil and paper, and then I got my first black comic. Okay, this is a whole new world, and I had to kind of learn to go back to paper and ink, just because there's a kind of what would you call it? There's kind of like a beautiful messiness sometimes to like a mid-pen line.
Yeah.
That sometimes it's hard to recreate digitally, and like
you also get feedback from the paper.
right.
You know?
There's different feedback. So like I'm working with a tablet. I have a friction screensaver to kind of give me a little more friction on the screen. Just because you're sliding on glass and your hand movements are it's like your ice skating. You might it might work for somebody else, but you might like overthrow a line. And I have to kind of use different like methods. I have a grip on my pen just so that like my hand isn't always like squeezing down the pen, so my lines aren't so like tense.
Yeah.
So I think there is like I would like to do. I did a short comic with pen and ink recently, and it was really great. And so there's really fun like benefits like working schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also at the end of the day, I mean, you have the art, and then you can sell the art theoretically.
Yeah, and that's always been like the problem, like the digital page.
Sure. Yeah, but some people just prefer working that way. Yeah. You know, what I hear all the time is it allows me to I hate what I've drawn. I can just pull that part out.
Yes. That's a pitfall, though.
Yeah.
Because there's and that's something else I had to pull myself out of recently. Because like with that book, there were so many undoes, and that book probably would have been done much sooner if it wasn't too much of that kind of pulling out.
Right.
So that's the kind of dangerous line you walk when you're working digitally. Is like it's so easy to just undo a line. And I learned from other comic book artists. Like there's beauty in the mistakes.
There is,
and
yeah.
sometimes, and I think like I even picked up a method from Mike. Like if you're working digitally, don't just undo. Like erase it with the eraser tool, because you might actually undo a whole lot of work by just doing one tap. So I've been doing that more. I've been embracing like any kind of line. Like if I'm drawing a character and like that line kind of comes off a little too much in like the character or something, I'm gonna leave it because it looks kind of nice. It's a happy little accident, Bob Ross. Like let's leave that in there, and I think it just makes it look more unique. And then like I've also honed in my digital brushes so they have that kind of subtle jitteriness and kind of like a very subtle little bleed. You can actually like hone in on that now with brushes. And so I'm working to kind of recreate that thing I would get with physical paper. The reason I don't do it with physical paper is because like my limited experience of working on comics, I'm like with high volume 200 pages, I don't have the time to relearn how to draw in ink again and correct mistakes. But that is one of my goals. I want to be able to be a master of both.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. This is what 48 or so, it doesn't have page numbers. So yeah. How long did it take you to draw this?
It was a 6-month period. I took like a 6 month. I was working as a motion designer, and I took 6 months off, and they were very nice to like give me that time. And that's the amount of time we had. I'm pretty sure there was definitely more, probably like an extra month of like what do I call it? Setting up in InDesign or digitally setting up the files and everything. But I think it was like a 6 month.
Okay. Yeah. So you're doing a page a day then?
Roughly, but definitely it took longer because, it was my first comic book.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I was overcorrecting, which is another problem.
Yeah.
Talk about the skeleton panel.
So there's a panel that I redrew like 4 times, and I didn't need to, and I upload these files to Dropbox so everyone can see when I update, and they saw that this one page was being updated every time, and Mike noticed. I'm trying to find him here. This one plugs in this guy. So there's like this little skeleton dude. This is the 3rd, 4th iteration of the same panel, and it didn't need to.
The first one was fine.
So I was nervous. I was like, this is my first book. I want to put my best put forward as
Yeah.
you know you should with any work.
Yeah.
And overcorrecting is as much of a pitfall as anything.
Yeah.
But damn, isn't that a good skeleton?
It was also funny because it wasn't like I get like redrawing like a pivotal moment or like a character reveal or something, but it just felt like you just got caught on something, and it was like you got caught in a net. Huh?
Yeah.
He's just there for one panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very funny.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to come back to him later and put him in the book.
He comes back in the third book, like,
Right.
"Oh, remember me? You threw that rock at me."
But that's also really normal. That's everybody does that at first. Like you have to kind of unlearn it.
Embrace the mistakes for sure.
Yeah.
I love your style so much, man. I just, I think I mentioned earlier, it reminds me a lot of like kind of 1940s cartoons. You said Fleischer, but I'm actually thinking more like, like the Warner Brothers stuff myself.
Yeah, people, I had friends tell me like, "Oh, you're using the ball and tube method." And I didn't think about it, but it's like essentially the ball and tube method is like you have balls that make the head, the body, the hands, and you use like cylindrical tubes to connect everything. And like that's totally what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what gives it the kind of cartoon feel. I grew up watching a lot of cartoons, so like I think like there's a lot of traces of that as well.
Yeah, it's just I'm not used to young guys like really knowing 40s stuff.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
No,
I mean,
I'm too old for that.
Like I used to watch like Tex Avery sketches and like the Merry Melodies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think like people still there's traces like there's a video game that came out a couple years ago called Cuphead, and it's all like Fleischer like animation style. And I think like a lot of animation, and I mean I can't speak for everyone, but I'm speaking outside of my industry. But like I think a lot of animation, like it's built off processes and styles from previous years.
Yeah.
So to see that in modern day, I don't think it's too unbelievable.
Yeah. I completely agree. Lettering. You do your own lettering?
Yeah, it's a digital font.
It's a font, okay.
But we're using for the next book, Mike digitized his handwriting.
Okay.
And it looks really sweet. So it's just nice to have typeface that also matches with like the feel of the book and that stuff.
Yeah. The effects, the onomatopoeia. Are these are hand?
Yeah, these are all hand.
Hand drawn.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the way that I draw sound effects and stuff is very inspired with the way Mike does lettering for other stuff that I've seen in books.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the onomatopoeia might very well be where I'm getting a lot of the sort of the 40s vibe from too. Just in terms of texture or something. I don't know that I can explain it that well. You're doing the coloring as well. Yeah.
And then I could say like I was reading a lot of Asterix, and I was like, okay, cool. I love how they have so many like fun little scenes. Like if you go back to that page, like you can imagine Obelix and Asterix like walking down that hill.
Yeah.
So totally like I think like I'm somebody who doesn't mind talking about like who my influences and references are. Yeah. Because like you're gonna pull things out and you're gonna create something completely new.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really always interested in pages, particularly like the page I'm looking at is that one there. Closer to the camera, you can see it anyway. But it's just, I mean, they're just walking. They're literally just walking, and so making that visually interesting seems like it's a real challenge.
Yeah, I think one of the things I drew a lot as a kid were just like trees, and just because like. You draw a building, you gotta know perspective. You gotta know how the bricks and the structure and like all the embellishments and the facade. Like, there's a lot of work. But when you're drawing a tree, it's such a natural object that like you can just kind of make the forms however you like. So like outdoor scenes are probably one of the more easier ones, just because like all the objects can move in so many different ways. But I think like to make something like that interesting, like you have overlapping hills. There's some sight gags like in that hill scene in the top right corner. There's like cow dogs, and I don't think people question that enough. Like, how does like a hierarchy of animals work in this world? Because like one of the first questions, like one of the first panels, there's a dog walking a dog.
Right.
I'm like, Mike, how does that work? And it's like, this is like a goofy Pluto rules. Like you know, there's just a dog. Like dogs exist in this dog world. So I made fun of that idea by making these cow dogs like the animals. So yeah, that's kind of how that came about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The color. I mean, obviously the coloring is all digital. How are you picking your colors and your textures?
I think that comes more with intuition. The textures. So with this book, again, like I wanted to create like I want to create a painterly world. This is also the reason why it also took so long, because rather than doing a drop fill, I'm actually like brushing in all the colors. So I'm selecting rather than doing like flats where you just kind of fill a whole thing with color, I'm just painting it in. So that's why you get all that picture in there.
Yeah.
Now, I love how it looks, but one of the things I learned with comics is a time commitment and a stamina commitment, and like I don't think it's cutting corners. I think it's more about efficiency.
Yeah.
And so like the next book, like it's made to be drop fill flat colors, but it still looks great because the colors still pop and everything. And that's kind of one of the lessons I took away from this book. Like it's nice to have all the time in the world to work on something, but then there's that reality check I mentioned earlier. Like there's deadlines. Like there's other people that are working on this too, and you have to think about what they have to do as well.
Yeah. So you guys are going back to these obviously because you've got the bigger book. Is it a 300-page book? I keep getting kind of different answers from you.
I think the book is. I'm gonna say it. I think it. Do you know the number?
It's like 210.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like 210, 220.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's exciting because like there's just so much story to put in there.
Yeah.
And like I'm so happy like Mike, like he mentioned earlier, like asking me like what do I want to draw. Like he's giving me so many great set pieces. Like here we have the tavern, the chapel, and then like the caves. But like we go to so many different places in this next book, and so it's going to be really exciting.
How far into it are you?
I'm gonna finish the line art for chapter 2 at the end of this month.
Okay.
Yeah. So we started. I don't know when we officially started. Wasn't. Yeah, I don't remember when we officially started, but there's probably 3 more chapters after that.
Okay.
So we're like 2/3 with the line art, and then just so that I don't have to jump around from too many things, the colors will come at the end once I do line art.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I assume, Michael, you've done all of your side of it. Yeah.
I'm actually still doing revisions.
Okay.
That should be done. I think my goal is the 1st. But yeah, that's kind of the great thing about like a collaborative process is I can, if I'm drawing it, I don't have time, but also writing is easier than drawing. So I feel like I'm required to put in more effort. I feel like it's the law. Like if I'm just putting down what comes down and be like, okay, I'm out of here. See you in a year. Like that's rude.
Yeah, it never feels like Mike isn't around for and then also the process is staggered, so he can work on the butt end of the book while I trail behind. So yeah, the process just kind of worked out.
Yeah.
Are there things, Michael? Are there things, Michael, that you've changed because you've seen the pages that have come in from Josue?
I don't know. I do know that the way they draw the characters does influence the writing. Kind of like how when an actor in season 1 brings something to a role, they start writing to the actor. There are characters that are now, especially we have like a group of bandit characters in the first book, and I'm getting ready to work on, or the second book, the first long book. I'm getting ready to work on the second long book, and those characters are very different than I had initially conceived of them, just based on the way Josue, does their body language and their gesturing.
they became so fun as characters, and like they're just these bandits at the start of the book, and so like to do something else with them is really fun.
They also originally weren't in the third act, and now they're in the third act of the long book. Just because, they're just so good. They gotta come back.
Yeah.
There's a lot of action in this next book too. Like we have a core villain in this book, but like there's like many different fight scenes that we're going to be putting into this next book. Just having that page count allows us to like play around so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you? I mean, given that you've got a 48-page book and now you're working on a 200-page book, do you ever think it's too much space? We're back. Sorry about that, folks. So, do you the difference in the length of the book?
I don't know, because like I feel like, again, like with Mike mentioning how like he writes, I feel like it doesn't feel like too much because we can find space to put to make the story or to add gags or something like that. Like I think that's what works with this style of writing in the comic. Is that like, to me, they feel like little comic strips. And so like, why wouldn't you want a book with more comic strips?
Sure. Yeah, I just, I think of, I don't know, like an Asterix, they're all 48 pages basically. I have a hard time picturing those guys working on a 200-page story.
Sure.
I'm sure they'd be able to. But, like you just sort of think about the work with a certain amount of breadth and shape. I don't know if that makes any sense.
The amount of information on an Asterix page is drastically more than the amount of information on one of our pages.
Sure.
I would say one of their pages is easily 4 of our pages anyway.
Yeah. With like the content and the amount of...
Yeah. I think we both read a lot more manga than the guy who made Asterix read.
Yes, because there wasn't manga back then.
That's the joke. But yeah, but I mean, also the original draft of the long book we did cut down just to fit, so I think we could do a 400-page book. We should do that.
Yeah, we also give ourselves the space to do really beautiful splash pages.
Yeah. Like
in the I wish I could share some pages with you, but like the first spread, right at the start of the second book, it's just like this glorious bridge going on to the next adventure. And it's just like I spent the whole page just trying to create this like beautiful seaside horizon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so like, some of those pages are used just like, hey, like just kind of sit in the world. And like in the when we first arrived at the chapel in this book, you also get hit with that big spread with all the gold and everything.
Yeah.
And then Mike made the deliberate. Originally, there was some dialogue there, but like Mike cut it out and just let the reader sit there and kind of let their eye wander and look at the little things.
No, because comics are also, audience participation. It really is an important part of comics, I think, is how the audience wants to pace their own reading experience and how they take things in, do we have a date for when the big book is scheduled?
I'm not sure.
I don't know what we're allowed to say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I know it's been announced who it was announced who.
And Publisher Weekly, they announced like who we're working with and stuff like that. But I don't know about the date.
Yeah.
Is it not Sprocket? You don't have to say who it is, but
it's what's the new company name?
It's Union Square Publishing. Yeah. Previously Sterling.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's the company that owns Barnes and Noble, maybe.
Barnes and Noble owns.
Yeah.
Interesting. Is that because they saw the work that had been done on this, or did you have an agent that pitched it out, or?
I have an agent. Yeah.
Okay.
Who is a beautiful person, who is an angel, and I love them. I did not think I would like having an agent, but they just took it around and showed it to everybody and helped us. Like, also, like, they set up, like, you know, I had a meeting with everybody who was kind of interested to help me figure out, like, are you gonna hate working with these people? You know, the first meeting we had with the editor we have on the new book, I was like, this is the person. Like, this, you know, yeah. I don't know how much I'm allowed to say though. I don't want to get arrested.
Well, I'll tell you, they won't arrest you.
No, I know that.
They may get mad at you, but they won't arrest you. I know that much.
You see a dart just coming.
Well, I'll just say everybody we're working with on it is very beautiful and kind and has good ideas that have been helpful.
No, that's fantastic.
I'm very happy. I generally am not good in a collaborative environment involving authority figures, and this has been perfect. So
no, that's the way you want it to be. You know, ideally, that's the way it'll always be. Do you guys see going on with Puppy Night in this world indefinitely? Do you have a 3-book plan? I don't know. Like, what do you see the shape of it to be?
How much can we say?
Broadly, I'm not saying specific. You don't have to answer it to the details.
We have a 3-book deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And our agreement is, I have an agreement with Josue that they have first right to draw any book in this universe.
Nice.
But if they super don't want to, I'm allowed to expand on it. But I might not even do that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is so much. It might get to the point where if Josue is like, nah, I'm busy, I'm like, okay, cool, no more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was like to have the opportunity to like work on 3 books. It was just like at this early in my career, I'm just like, holy crud. This is wild and amazing. So, like, you know, for sure, like, I'm going to be on board for these 3 books.
Yeah.
And then, like, you know, the timetables on these things are crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, but like the whole realm of like your lifetime is drop in the bucket.
Sure.
And so, like, yeah, you know.
But drawing what will be theoretically 600 pages or more,
Yeah.
That's a huge commitment.
Yeah. It's going to be amazing.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
We also.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was going to say, we also haven't really talked about it, but I've been thinking about if Josue is like, hey, I cannot draw 200 more pages of this. Maybe we co-write a book together.
Yeah.
And then, you know, get an artist.
Yeah.
Josue is a great writer.
I don't know about that yet, but
you've got the moxie, kid. You got the intuition.
You see how like he inspires you to like take on crazy things. I was like, you know what, you're right, Mike. I'm gonna go write a novel, and then like okay. But we both love the world so much, and so like, you know, 600 pages is like great. I can't believe we get that much to bring more people into this world, and like we've talked about like where this could go, and like what kind of other characters or worlds. There's a map in the inside cover that potentially shows where we're gonna go. So it's exciting.
Yeah. All punny places too.
Yeah.
All punny places. So you haven't felt like going from 48 to wherever you're at in your 200, your first 200, like it hasn't been a challenge.
I mean, we're pretty early. Like I want to be honest. Like there are periods of burnout when it comes to like, okay, like I think comics is different than like when I was doing graphic design or motion design, just because like I'm not beholden to an art director or a client. Like this work is very much in my own hands, and so like I'm responsible for those timetables, you know. And so sometimes like that's the daunting part. Is like, okay, like I gotta remind myself that I need to give myself a break sometimes. Like I need to take the vacation, you know, like because I can just be in this book. Yeah. But like, you know, I've come to recognize it. I know when like I'm starting to teeter. I'm like, okay, I need to do something else, and I'll hop on to like my own stories or something that I'm working on, or like that short that I was working on with my friend. Like that's how I love to draw, so that's not what burns me out. It burns me out when I'm like, my brain has just been too steady on one thing. And I think that might be what you're getting at, like that. So many pages, like how does it affect me? And I think it's just kind of like, you need variety in all aspects of your life. Yeah. And I think even with like working on a story that I love, like I also need to hop on and explore creatively.
Yeah, yeah, just sort of refresh the palate.
Exactly.
Yeah. You can eat a lot of sushi, but having pieces of ginger in between makes it all taste better at the end.
Exactly.
That would be my metaphor. Ben, do we have any questions or anything that you want to put up? Give him a second. We'll see. From Catherine Gonzalez, how has the art evolved from the first book to the second book?
Sorry, I'm laughing because that's my wife.
Wives always ask the best questions.
Yeah. It's changed a lot. Again, like I was trying to find my footing with this book. Like one thing, when you were using the metaphor of like exercising a muscle, like the muscle memory it takes to draw a character over and over again, like that. This is my trial. You're gonna see Sparky and Pugsley from panel 1 get better and better drawn as we move on in the book.
Right.
But now, like it's second nature. Like it's like the shapes are down. Like I think Sparky's head is like 8 half circles to draw, and like you start picking up on like the patterns of how to draw. So like the art's more consistent in the second book. But like there's a kind of like a very cute, like if you read One Piece, like the first volume of One Piece, like the way Oda draws Luffy is so different from how he draws him now.
Sure.
And it's just kind of like this natural progression you kind of want to see out of your artist.
Yeah. No, very much so. Yeah. Very much so. I hope that answered your question, ma'am. I love it. Anything else? Is that okay? Very good. Okay, so let me ask. I want to ask you this, Michael. Broadly, what would you say is the differences and or strengths and weaknesses between doing sort of Tumblr style comics versus printed comics versus working for a large company and doing a bigger comic? So if that's not too broad of a question.
No. So I will not make something that's not intended for print, and I never have. The stuff I put on Tumblr was just excerpts from my zines I was making. For me, I need that, like just putting something online, and there's something about the way the internet works that just I don't get dopamine the same way I think a lot of people do. Like, I've put like strip comics on Reddit and gotten on the front page, and I don't feel anything from that. But when I sell a little floppy zine for like $1, I feel a lot. I think it's just the buy-in is too easy on internet stuff. So, and it feels more real when you just interact. It feels like you're actually interacting with a person when you exchange a book. But I think largely everything feels the same to me. When I'm working, I'm completely absorbed in the process. And the circumstance of the material, where it's going, who it's for, how it's being done, largely doesn't exist in that moment. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a good amount of sense. I wonder too about, and I don't want to be crass, but like the monetization portion of it, right? Because when you put stuff on the internet, for the most part, you're never getting paid directly. You don't get paid for things on Tumblr, and even a lot of the digital comics platforms like Tapas and whatever. 98% of those people are making those comics and they're doing it for free.
So I think specifically because the things were excerpts from books, I was getting paid because people who saw it and liked it bought the book. Okay. So that was never, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really think about that much when I'm working. That's a different Michael.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you got to pay rent, you know, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've been very fortunate to not have a lot of expenses. You know, when you know when money was tight, and we were living in Philadelphia. We moved to a trailer in the woods instead of we could have changed our artistic behavior patterns, but it was just like it is more important to us to not have to consider that. I don't know. I've been very lucky to not have to think about it because I've had very supportive readers.
Yeah.
When things go real bad, I've got, people who can give me freelance jobs. And I've just been good because I'm not planning to retire.
Do you broadly think that the audience for a book like Puppy Night is the same as the audience for your, let's call it, alternative work?
When I'm making it, the audience is me.
Is you? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's I'm sure I do know that I have more potential income from this. But I've got a YA book and I've got adult books, and I've made more money on my adult books than I've ever made on the book sales are fine. So I think there's like this idea that the money's in YA, and it's a huge growth market, but realistically the advances are in YA. If you want to get a big advance, you should do a YA book. But financially, a great adult comic, as long as you're not trying to put 3 kids through college, you can still, also, I have like no expenses. I draw all day. So, that might be easy for me to say, but it's, to me, financially, it doesn't, the payoff seems like it could potentially be bigger, but I've seen where some indie cartoonist dudes live with their nice houses in Portland. So
sure.
I try not to think about it too much. Maybe those people are also rich. I don't understand how any of these people work.
Well, I think in a lot of cases, people are doing projects outside of comics.
Yeah.
Which is where they're actually making their money, doing album covers, say, or posters and things like that, rather than directly the comics. I don't know that. I mean, certainly Dan Klaus is in a different class, but I don't know that the comics themselves are particularly paying his way.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's other avenues.
Yeah.
I think like since I'm so early in this, like you're so like because I've checked out the Patreon route, and I've enjoyed it, but like when I'm drawing all day, it's hard to come up with extra content, like especially with like using social media. So like often like I love sharing all the things that I love to do, and I hate personally like I don't like to put it behind a paywall. I want everyone to be able to see it, and like going from working as a graphic designer, motion designer, to a comic book artist, it was a very like steep pay difference. Like I wouldn't have been able to like do it and live in the city if it wasn't for my wife. Like she's a big support.
Right.
So like I think it's good to have that reality. That kind of like what do they call that? Paid disclosure in the industry, so that like other people can understand like, hey, like this could be achievable with certain like caveats, or you have to like make some certain like sacrifices, something like that. And I think we got to start being super secretive about like how people really have to make their money.
I agree.
It's a mixture of so many different avenues.
This is why I ask these questions, and we're not just talking about the creativity. We're also talking about the money part of it, because it's genuinely important. Like how Michael, you were mentioning that the advances on a kid's book are going to be pretty okay. But, I've talked to a number of people that when you start doing the math on how much time it takes them to draw those pages, suddenly they're not making minimum wage. They're not even making close to minimum wage doing it. And that's not a thing that people talk about,
So I will expand on what I said earlier. I think what I was trying to say was, speaking of money in YA, I think a lot of people specifically do a YA book because they think it's going to be a financial win for them.
Sure.
And what I'm trying to say is as an artist, you should do what you are most passionate about.
Yeah.
Because if you're just doing it for money, it's going to suck and you are not going to make money. And I think that's a big thing in YA right now is I know a lot of people who have taken YA projects that they're not passionate about. Yeah. And I'm very nervous about those books because it's like, was this the right move? Like, because it's not guaranteed money.
And especially as more and more people are doing material for the kids segment, then it's more things you're competing against.
Yeah.
And it while that does increase the overall pool, it makes any particular person's success in it not that great.
Sure.
You know, as screwed up as the direct market portion of the comic book industry can be, I find it much more honest to make money as you sell your work rather than getting money in advance that you then don't get any more unless you sell enough copies.
Sure.
You know, like that seems like a really weird way to do business to me. I understand why it's done, but I think that makes a lot more sense in prose, right? Yeah. Because a prose author can certainly bang out potentially 10 or 20 pages a day if they need to, you know? You probably can't bang out 20 pages a day.
Right.
Probably not possible.
Again, like it's a very new world for me.
Sure.
And like the advance we got, like it put me in a place where like if I had to do comics and then work part-time somewhere else, like that timetable is gonna have to stretch much farther than it is. And like again, like I mentioned, these timetables are crazy to think like, okay, these 3 books are gonna come out in these years where I'm all like, oh, is a meteor going to hit the planet at that time? So like to be able to like, you know, have in advance ahead of time that allows me to be like, okay, like I still can like pay my portion of the rent. I can still like pay my portion of the groceries and stuff like that. Like I'm more relieved that I can be hyper focused on the book and not have to worry about some another client or something else.
Yeah, ideally, I always think that it's better for creative people to own and control their work, and to have the ability to keep it in print on their own, and that being their decision.
Our contracts let us do all of that. We own all of our media. Yeah. We have a clause that says if it's out of print for a certain amount of time, we get the rights back.
Nice.
So
you've got a good agent there.
Yeah. I'm also a jerk. That was the word I was going to say, jerk. I've been very into like the 80s black and white boom for most of my time in comics. So that stuff has always been like, I've always assumed everybody was trying to rip me off. Yeah. Because, you know, to a certain extent, I mean, it's in comics, it's really not until you kind of have your 3rd or 4th or 5th spine that you actually start making any real money in a way, you know, because that's how the market recognizes that you've got presence, you've got rack presence, you know, so ultimately. Okay, very good. How about this? Was there anything I should have asked that I didn't ask?
No.
That's the first time I've ever asked that question, so I don't know how that one's going to work out.
I'm trying to think. I feel like I always like to share the fact that like our main lead character Sparky, there's an ongoing joke that I think it wasn't even part of the comic. For some reason, I think one of the jokes was like Sparky can't read, and there's gonna be this gag where essentially what was it that he couldn't read that his name was on the wanted poster? No, that is in the first book. Yeah, like he's all like, what is like he sees a wanted poster with his face and he's angry and is like, wait, what does this say? Like I don't know why I'm so angry about it. Like, you know, what does it say? And I don't know. That's not a question. I just like to bring up. We made that a character quirk of this, but I have no idea where it came from.
All of my YA books feature a character that either can't or struggles to read.
Is that from like a person? I mean, I have my own personal thing where like again like focus is a thing where like I got to jump around to other things.
Yes, I mean I think it's a thing that a lot of, you know, I very rarely put things in, but you know, that are like not intuitive, but also it's it's like fun for somebody to see themselves in the work. And if they're a young person, they're learning to read, and they see a character in the book who also might have that same problem. I think it's just fun.
We're not trying to promote illiteracy.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
I'm not willing to go that far. I'm willing to say I'm open to illiteracy. You should know how to read.
I love it. I love it. All right, so we know that you guys are working on more of this, so that's good. Is there anything else you would like to plug? Maybe that you've got coming up, or that is in a state where you can talk about it. You can say no to that question too.
You're going to SPX.
We're going to SPX this year. My favorite comic convention. My wife and I got married there a few years ago. I will never not go to SPX if I can. I've got a 6-issue miniseries coming out with Silver Sprocket next year. That's not for children. Called Everything Sucks. It's just more of a comic I do. I got a lot of stuff happening. I don't remember it all. I guess if you Google me, you'll find it.
Okay. I always like giving people the opportunity to pitch to the audience.
I should have prepared. Yeah,
it's all good.
Yeah.
You got anything else or is this is like your life?
This is my life right now. I mean, you can always follow me. I always love posting like sneak peeks, but check out Den of Deception, and then look forward to Puppy Night's Quest for the Golden Bones.
Nice. Quest for the Golden Bones. I love it. We will keep an eye out for that, because everybody has been responding. The kids have been responding great to this, so I think that they're going to love having more.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Especially if you're going to have them out on a semi-regular basis. Yeah. That's always the big thing. Cool. All right. Well, then let's go to the last question. The first question and the last question are always the same. The last question is there are a lot of people who watch these interviews who want to make their own comics. They don't always know where to go, how to start, what to do. I want to start with you, Michael, just because you've been doing this a little longer. What would be the piece of advice that you would give someone who wants to make comics? It can be physical, it can be psychological, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual, anywhere in that whole range. What do you got? What do you say to that person?
So I started making comics when I was 21 years old. I had no drawing or writing experience, and I did not know what I was doing with my life. I had very poor support structure. Whatever, not important. But I will say comics, if you want to make them, just make them. There's a book called Comics Philosophy and Practice. Great primer. Are there any other books I like that you know of? Get Comics Philosophy and Practice. It's very short, very easy, and it's amazing. It'll tell you everything you need to know. I tried to go to college for comics, and I had to leave because I am not good with authority figures or rich people. And I decided to learn to make comics by drawing 10,000 pages of comics, based on like the 10,000 hour rule. And then there's a guy who said, you don't do a good page till you've drawn 2,000 pages that we're not gonna talk about on a kid's show. And by the time I got to about, I don't know, I did a lot of pages, and before I even finished, I knew what I wanted to do and had something, but nobody cared for the first 1,000, 1,200 pages at all. Like nobody. I had no feedback. I had nothing. So just do it and don't worry about if anybody likes it or sees it. Maybe don't even show somebody for 500, 600 pages. Just like, if you're not going to like it having like alone, if it's not going to be fun, it's not going to be fun when people are telling you you're stupid for doing it, which will happen if you do it. Yeah. So just
I agree with everything you said there. The only thing I just want to say to, especially to the kids out there, don't think you have to do 1,000 pages.
No.
Do 3 pages first.
Yeah.
And then move on from that. Right.
Like, I started with a small book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not contradicting you there.
No. If we're talking to kids, have as much fun as you can. You don't have to worry about even producing pages till you're in your 20s. Yeah. As long as you're having fun, you're going to be better later. So I forgot I was talking to kids.
No, it's all good. No, I didn't phrase it in that way either.
Yeah.
Josue, what do you think?
I'd say again, embrace the mistakes. I think a lot of the hangups people get is like I can't draw, and I feel like some of like the best comics I've read are just like the simplest drawings. And I think getting out of your headspace of like feeling that like you can't put pen to paper and create something, I think that's like the first hurdle you gotta get across. And like I even recommend like try drawing something with your non-dominant hand. And if you're ambidextrous, then draw with your foot or something. But like essentially, get comfortable with scribbles. Get comfortable with like messy drawing, because like the first hurdle is just draw something on that blank page and then something with it. And then the only other thing I would say is like work with your friends, build something together. Because like probably one of the best experiences I've had so far starting comics is like meeting other comics people who want to make a bunch of cool stuff too, and then working with them to make that cool stuff happen.
Yeah. I love it. That's great. That's great. I love it. Okay, well, I think that's our show, and I want to thank both you guys for being here and talking to us about making comics. I want to thank everybody who's been watching at home as well. If you're sitting there at home and you are like, I need a book and I need something to read and I want to have fun, Puppy Night. It's really fun. It's funny. It's a really joyous kind of comic, and it's pretty. And it's got action and adventure, and it's good. You're gonna love it. So that is my recommendation to you. A little outstanding, not outstanding business necessarily, but the next show that we're having, it will be our adult club, and we are talking to Rumi Hara. I may have pronounced that wrong. I will find out. Who did Peanut Butter Sisters from Drawn and Quarterly? So that will be on Wednesday. Yeah, by all means. And then next month's kids book will be The Girl and the Glim. And so we will be talking to India Smith and Michael Doig. I don't know why. Again, we'll ask him how you pronounce his last name, and we'll figure it out. And that'll be in a month. So you come back next month, and we will be talking more and more comics. We love talking comics. I want to thank my staff for letting me do this kind of stuff, because they take care of the store, and so I can sit around and have philosophical conversations about comics. I want to thank Jordan, our producer, for doing the backstage stuff. I want to thank Ben, who is our showrunner and acts as our cameraman and does all the stuff here. We couldn't do it without you. I want to thank all you kids at home and all of you adults at home too who are watching these things. And I especially want to thank all the creators who make comics, just like Michael and Josue here. Thank you so much for making such a great comic, and that's what I got.
Thank you for having us, Brian. Yeah, really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. We will talk to you next month. Take care, y'all. Thanks very much for watching this episode of the Kids Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were seeing, please subscribe and hit the bell up in the corner. We'd like to invite you to join the club. Every month you'll get a great new book curated by our staff, and it's a fantastic program. So please join. That address is running along the bottom right now. Thanks very much.
The pink hues